Hi, my name is Steve Jaynes. This is the More Abundant Life Podcast, episode number 431, Reading Esther, Part 2. We're still looking at the keys to walking by the Spirit. This episode, we will continue examining God's providence as seen in the book of Esther. Right now, I'd like to get into Reading Esther, Part 2. First, I'd like to give a little summary of what we listened to on last episode. Yes. Vesti, the queen, lost her place for not going to a party to be shown off by the king. He didn't like it. They got a new queen. And Esther became the new queen after the king and his council, they saw all the beautiful virgins and tested them in the kingdom. And Esther became the next queen. And she was a Jew taught by her uncle Mordecai, a man of God, a believer who watched over her. And some scholars believe that he probably wrote the book of Esther. It doesn't say that anywhere. I don't know where they get that, but it might be true. He was there anyhow. But when they say that he wrote the book of Esther, that's not true either. God is the author of his word. So it doesn't matter who wrote it. We know God is the author of his word. A man named Haman, the Jews' enemy, set it up so that all the Jews would be killed. This is real people dealing with real problems and real troubles in life. And that's where the Old Testament can be, for our learning. Okay, this is a big problem. What's going on? How do we handle the problem? There's where the lesson is for us. So I'd like to go to Esther. We're going to start in chapter 4. But I want to read 2 verses in chapter 3. Chapter 3, 13, it says, "And letters were sent by the post to all the king's providences, to destroy, to kill, to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, to take the spoil of them for prey." And then 15, "The post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace, and the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed." And that's where we left off. I want to continue reading from there. But I want you to see, this is real trouble, real problem. They want to kill everybody, all the Jews. It'd be like if someone said, anyone who is a Christian, we're going to kill you all, we're tired of you. Which has happened in different countries. It's something that can happen because God has an enemy. The Jews, God's people, have an enemy. And that is the devil, the adversary. He's always trying to get to us, get to the word, get to believers. He's our enemy. It says it in Esther a couple of times, and it's still true. Chapter 4, verse 1. "When Mordecai perceived that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate, for none might enter unto the king's gate clothed in sackcloth." But he did it anyway. One of the things about Mordecai, he wasn't afraid of the enemy or the king or anybody. He always did what he thought God wanted him to do. "And in every providence, whitherso the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it her. Then was the queen exceeding grieved, and she sent raiment of clothes to Mordecai to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. Then called Esther for Hatak, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So Hatak went forth to Mordecai unto the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasury for the Jews to destroy them. Also he gave the copy of the writings of the decree that was written in Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king, to make supplication unto him, and to make request before him, before her people. And Hatak came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again, Esther spake unto Hatak, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces to know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king, unto the inner court, who is not cold, there is one law to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out his gold scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. And they told Mordecai Esther's words. And Mordecai commanded to answer Esther. And you can see what's going on. Esther's saying what's going on. Mordecai tells it. He asks some more questions. She gives them the law or what's going on. And now Mordecai is here saying to answer Esther, think not within thyself that thou escaped the king's house more than all the Jews? For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall there an enlargement be deliverance arise to the Jews from another place, but thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And here he's pointing out the providence of God. You might be there at this time for this reason. And a key to walking by the Spirit is to be aware of God's providences, okay? And which can happen. And what that really, all that really means to us is we're just aware of what's going on around us. We might be on a ride somewhere and we'll see something. Oh, I could use this, or whatever this is might help me in my situation. God is working to bring deliverance, whatever it is that we need. So we just need to be cognizant that that can happen. We don't want to be fooled by things like this. That's why we have to check it with the word. We're perceptive, spiritually perceptive. Lots of times these things happen when we really see it in the end, after it's happened. Oh, that person told me about this and that got me to here, and I saw this and I bought this, and it was just the thing I needed for great deliverance. And then afterwards you go, that was probably God. But the next time we might be easier to see these things. It's practicing the presence of God. One of the ways to practice the presence of God. 15, then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. And here the message goes back. Gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. Well, she was going to die anyhow, one way or the other, right? So that's what she did. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all Esther had commanded him. I think it's pretty neat. We know it's the will of God if it comes to pass. That's always a key to knowing it's the will of God. In reading the record, we know that it came to pass. They went and did this thing. Who got the revelation? How the revelation worked? I don't know exactly. Except Mordecai was a teacher of the word. Raised up Esther. Esther was a believer who knew the promises of God. A relatively few people had Holy Spirit during the Old Testament period, but all of them were to know the word. So we don't know everything here, but we know those two things are in play. What's really happening here is that there's more prayers, more fasting. Fasting means devotion to God, more devotion to God, more humility. See, Mordecai sat in sackcloth, and that was to show humility, but not before the king, for God. That's why they did that. This is another example of real people dealing with real tough problems. Okay? Keep something here, finger or something, and go to Mark chapter 9. And this is the record of the boy that was possessed, and the father said, Jesus, if you can do anything, help us. The disciples couldn't do it. Jesus was able to handle it. And go to Mark 9:28. And when he was come unto the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could not we cast them out? They asked that question. And it was a pretty logical question because they were doing signs, miracles, and wonders. So they were believers having success believing. And he said unto them, this kind can come forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting. One of the things is when I studied this years ago or a few years ago, this word, this kind is only used twice in the Bible. Because I was wondering what this kind is. What is this kind talking about? Devil spirits, this, whatever. What is it talking about? But it comes by prayer. We know what prayer is, fasting, devotion to God. This is how it gets there. Go to Matthew chapter 17. This is the other place it's used. Matthew 17. Okay, and we're going to start in 19. Then came the disciples to Jesus apart and said, why could not we cast him out? This is the same record. This is the same record, but there's more information here that will help us to understand this thing of prayer and fasting. And Jesus said unto them, because of your unbelief. For verily I say unto you, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, a very small seed, if you just have a little bit of believing, is what it's saying, ye shall say unto this mountain. This mountain means a tough, big problem. We looked at it a couple of weeks ago in Matthew chapter 11, and I taught at that time, the word mountain is a figure of speech for a giant problem, a big problem. I've never seen in the Bible anyone moving a mountain. I've never seen any believer move a mountain. But if you had to, you could. I'll go with that. But the thing is, well, whatever big problem it is, this is the way to handle it, or at least one way. Ye shall say unto this mountain, removed hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. And that means us. Howbeit this kind, big, hairy problems, right? Goeth not out, but by prayer and fasting, prayer and devotion to God. In Esther, we read, they did more prayer. They got together and said, we're pray 3 days, 3 nights, let's get this done. And so that's what they did. Let's go back to Esther, chapter 5. In verse 17, so Mordecai went his way and did as Esther, according to all that Esther had commanded him. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house over against the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, what wilt thou, King Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be given thee, even to the half of thy kingdom. He's going to give her a lot, even to the half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, if it seemeth good unto the king to let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king says, cause Haman to make haste that he may do as Esther hath said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Why did she do that? It must have been inspired to do, got revelation to do. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, my petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will tomorrow as the kings have said. Then went Haman forth that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh, his wife. And Haman told him of the glory of the riches and the multitude of his children, and all the things wherein the king hath promoted him, and how he had advanced him above all the princes and servants of the king. And Haman said, moreover, yea, Esther, the queen, did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared, but myself. And tomorrow I am invited unto her also with the king. Yet all of this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting at the king's gate. Then said Zeresh his wife and all his friends unto him, let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go thou in merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. Can you imagine? I wonder who's going to use that gallows. When anyone messes with God's people, that is not good. It really isn't. People may think they're going to win. They might be called into the king. They might get a good promotion. But if they mess with God's people, it is not good for them. I don't know what will happen. I don't know when it will happen. I just know that it's not good for them. Chapter 6. On that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of the records of the chronicles that were read before the king. Why couldn't he sleep? I don't know. Restless night. And it was found written that Mordecai had told the king of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlain, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hands on the king and Ahasuerus. And the king said, what honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this? Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, there is nothing done for him. You didn't reward him at all. And the king said, who is in the court? Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The timing was unique, huh? And that's what it's like sometimes when you're praying and believing and waiting for God. It'll come right then, right when you need it the most. I've noticed that in things that I've done in my life. Verse 5. And the king's servant said unto him, behold, it's Haman standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, see, the king didn't wait for Haman to talk about hanging Mordecai. Not that it made any difference, but the king had something to say. Kings will always talk first. So he says, the king said unto him, what shall be done unto the man who the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight to honor more than himself? Oh, then Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought, which the king used to wear, and a horse that the king rideth upon, and a crown royal which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of the one the king most noble princess, that they may array the man with whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Then the king said to Haman, make haste, take their apparel and the horse as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew that sitteth at the king's gate, and let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. His jaw must have hit the ground. And what is he gonna do? It says here, then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the streets of the city, and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor. See him pulling the horse along and saying this? He could hardly look at him. And Mordecai came against to the king's gate, and Haman hastened to his house mourning, and having his head covered. And Haman told Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, if Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, for whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him. but shall surely fall before him. Yet talketh with him the king's chamberlains and hastened to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. Oh no, what's going to happen now? He just gets home and his friends tell him, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make it. You can't go against the king. You're in trouble. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day of the banquet of wine, what is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be formed, even to the half of the kingdom. Then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight. Look at the way, if I have. She's not telling him what to do. She's just letting her know. If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it had pleased the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we have been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, which they were, see, they were to be slaves, right? I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then King Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he and where is he that doth presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, the adversary, the enemy. I love this. He says exactly who he is. We call the devil sometimes our adversary because he's adverse us. When things are coming down on us, we got to see clearly sometimes it's the adversary. He's trying to make things tough for us. And he's our enemy. And here, she's pointing out to who's his agent right here, is this wicked Haman. And Haman was afraid before the king and the queen, and the king arises from the banquet of wine in his wrath and went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. And when the king returned out of the palace garden unto the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed thereon Esther was, then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in his house? And as the words went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. He couldn't even defend himself. And Harbayana, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold also the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then said the king, hang him thereon, put him on there. And so they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. I want to go to the last verse in this book, which is chapter 10, verse 3, because this is where it heads. For Mordecai the Jew was next to the king, Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed. This is what believers should do today. We should be seeking how we can help others with their wealth. Jesus Christ came that we might have life and have it more abundant. And lots of times people are very quick to say, well, that doesn't always mean money, which is true, but it's part of it. We're to have what we need. We're to be blessed. We're God's chosen people. the more abundant life is available to us.
We are a listener-supported podcast. I want to thank those who generously give so that we can keep the podcast available. The podcast is heard around the world for all those who would want to know how to accurately understand the Bible when they read.
The episode is complete, so head over to stevejaynes.com. If you're interested in learning how to read the Bible, there's also an audio class and companion books available on how to read the Bible for understanding and power. The website has audio teachings and biblical studies books, all there to help you grow in God's grace and in the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Listen next week for another reading of God's wonderful, matchless Word.